All right, yeah, people are starting to join now.
Okay, great.
Good.
Hi, Sally.
Feel free to say hi on the chat box on the right side of your screen. You hit chat on the bottom of the screen. Let us know you're here.
Yes, good morning.
About books.
Yes, we're talking about books. I think we have like 6 or 7 people signed up, Sally, which is less than usual, but happy to talk about some of the books that we're doing for Congress. All right. Well, Sally, we're going to start, but you know us, so I don't have to introduce ourselves. I'm Joanna, and this is Megan, and we are working on Congress, which is happening in 3 weeks, and we thought it would be a really fun idea to gather together the books by the various presenters and just give a little overview of each and talk about why they're interesting. So I'm going to start with Living with a Green Heart, which is a book by Gay Brown, which I read back in the fall. And Gay is actually a friend of mine. We've known each other for about 7 years. She used to work for American Express, and she founded a business called Greentopia out on the West Coast, which was a resource guide for places where you could find green resources or options. And I think that one of the things that's interesting about Gay is that she came to this work via one of her children who had a severe learning disability. And what she discovered in that journey was that he had heavy metal toxicity in his body that was causing autism. And so she essentially resolved his learning disability through chelation, which I'll share what that is. So basically, chelation is a way that you eliminate heavy metal toxicity from your liver. And it involves, some supplements and some therapies. But so that's how she came to be interested in doing this work and in a more greener world, because her child at a very young age was already carrying so much toxins in his liver that it caused him to basically be diagnosed with autism, which is not what the problem was. So anyway, this is a great resource and a great book about simple ways for you to incorporate green living into your everyday life. So that is Living with a Green Heart, Gay Brown. Okay. Next book is called The Transformation. And this is a book that talks about wholeness and healing after trauma. It's written by James Gordon, who's a doctor. He's also the head of the I want to just read he's the head of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. He's incredibly distinguished. He's worked with over 130 international faculty members and brought this program to populations really as diverse as refugees from wars in the Balkans, the Middle East, and Africa. And essentially what this book does is talk about the ways in which he has taught people how to resolve trauma in the body. So there's a bit of a background to that, because the place where I first came to know about the fact that trauma could be stored in the body there was a woman who wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion. Her name is Candace Pert. And I read this book a long time ago, probably in the 90s. And she talked about how emotion can be stored in the molecules of the body. And so, she was kind of a precursor to some of Dr. Gordon's work. What he really does is talk about how you heal this yourself. How do you, do the visualization and the meditation and the thinking around getting the trauma actually out of the body, because carrying that trauma around is completely detrimental to our wellness and can cause us to, well, certainly number one, store fat cells. So if you have an unresolved emotion, our tendency is, if we don't deal with it, we wrap a fat cell around it and attach it somewhere in our body. Worse is if the trauma is really horrific, you can also put that trauma into your lymph system, and then it travels around, and what happens is it tends to cause disease or depression or things that are, really debilitating. So this is this book, Dr. James Gordon. He's presenting at our Congress as well. Really thrilled to have him. Let's see what's next. Next is economics, which is really fascinating. So this is Dr. Jim Gordon Ritchie. Has a PhD. He is a professor who has taught at both Harvard and MIT. And the premise for this book is really deals with economics. So the book is called Economics, the Science of Abundance. And essentially what this book talks about is how the current system for economics is built on a model of scarcity. And what he wants to do is to change the way we're dealing with that and to build the model on abundance. And the way that we get to abundance is through creating agreements. And so that really looks like a group of people coming together, defining what their agreements are, and then raising the vibration or the vibrancy, as he refers to it, of the group through these predetermined agreements. And then you sort of move naturally into the abundance mindset, as opposed to approaching a problem from a mindset of scarcity. We don't have enough time, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough people, to saying, okay, if we have all those things, how do we move the ball forward? So he has a completely different approach to solving, business problems through this lens of abundance versus scarcity. He has a extremely long and well-recognized following. He serves on the boards of many not-for-profit corporations, and he's actually, some of you might find this interesting, he's worked with and coached the company called Thorlo, which is a sock company that's been around for a long time, for nearly 20 years in this exact business model, and they have created their entire system of internal economics at Thorlo through economics. All right, this is economics. I want to talk a little bit, those are the 3 books that I have hard copies of. The other books I've either read through Audible or online, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the other folks who are presenting who have book titles. So John Rulak, who is a expert on, hemp, cannabis, to a certain degree ocean health, regenerative farming. He's written a bunch of books a number of years ago on composting and recycling, and he's really been an activist in this field. And I would use the word activist because that is what he is. John Rulak, make no mistake, is an activist. Right now, he's talking about how hemp and CBD can impact the world for the better, mainly because those things can be used for such a myriad of building materials and solutions, and are, a very, very sustainable crop. I don't know if you all know that hemp has the complete ability to regenerate soil. If you plant a hemp crop on land that has been contaminated by, whether it's glyphosate or which is the active ingredient in Roundup produced by Monsanto, or say there's been some sort of environmental spill or disaster, like similar to Chernobyl in Russia, they planted hemp crops over those sites and completely remediated the soil. So he is going to come and share his expertise with us. He has, I think, 4 or 5 books. Then we have Lynn Madsen, who's a very interesting sort of character. She is, how old did she say she was, Megan?
60s.
She's in her 60s, and
Yeah.
she has had a very colorful and long career. She has a PhD in psychology, and she's also a medical doctor. And she's also an expert in the field of anthroposophy, which is a science that was created by Rudolf Steiner. She's written 5 books. Most of them have been since she lost her medical degree. So she went through, as she calls it, an adventure with the feds, which would be the federal government, who came after her because of an issue they were having with how she billed out saline treatments through Medicare. And so this turned into quite a journey for Lynn. And it's really a very personal story to her, because at this point in her life, she lives in a van and she travels around, and she's taught herself how to play the fiddle, and she talks to people about her story. And, she sees this story through the arc of 7 planets, right? So the whole concept of planetary biography and anthroposophy is that there are 7 planets and 7 organs and 7 timelines of your life from birth until the time, is it 71 or 73, Megan?
I
Do you
think
remember?
75 or the
75.
grade.
So
Yeah.
somewhere in the early 70s. So she creates this methodology for how your life is measured through these various touch points. So each of these timelines is then associated with a planet, which is then associated with an organ. And certain things that you go through in your life are parts of these phases. So she is going to be talking about personal biography, sharing a little bit about her story, um, and and her journey of, she, over the last 3 years, she's taught herself how to play the fiddle, and she goes into different communities and campgrounds and plays the fiddle, and gets donations, and really has this sort of very zen like existence.
Mhm.
Do you want to add anything, Megan?
Yeah, I was just going to also say, I think she was bringing up the topic too, that she's now living the life that she feels like she was meant to be, and got rid of like what she felt like she was supposed to live.
Right.
Losing her license and now living more free life, feeling it within her heart a little more.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, none of this was designed by her to make you feel sorry for her.
Mhm.
She has a very nice van. Her van is very nice. It's very well equipped, but she has gone through this process of shedding all of her material possessions. Everything that she owns is in the van, and then she lives very mindfully, and actually in a very green way. She preserves and is very careful about all of her resources, and has this sort of nomadic existence that allows her to go from place to place and learn from whatever it is she encounters. And a little bit about her current journey. She is fully exploring Joan of Arc right now. So this is actually, I find this fascinating on a couple different levels. One is she was invited to Denmark, where there's a Joan of Arc museum, and she spoke there about Joan of Arc because she's done extensive research on Joan of Arc's life. And this is something I didn't know until I met Lynn and had some very long conversations with her, is that Mark Twain was an expert on Joan of Arc. And he also wrote a book, like a long book, which I purchased and have not finished reading yet, about Joan of Arc. She was one of the main influences in his life and writing. And so, she's a much reported on figure who, to a large degree, has been misunderstood. And so Lynn's next book is going to be about Joan of Arc. All right. So who else do we have?
Fibershed.
Oh, Fibershed, right. So Fibershed is a not-for-profit that was started in Northern California by a woman named Rebecca Burgess. You can check out her website. It's fibershed.com. Her book has just come out. It's called Fibers. And this woman is a complete dynamo. I cannot even, I haven't met her. I've only spoken to her. She started this not-for-profit. She's the executive director, and she's the chair of the board. She's the executive director for Fibershed, and she's the chair of the board for the Carbon Cycle Institute. She has a decade of experience in writing and works on hands-on curriculum in terms of restoration of ecology and fiber systems. Part of the premise for Fibershed is that she spent a year wearing only clothing that was produced, grown, manufactured, and crafted in the Northern California area. So she has created workshops and done for a range of NGOs and corporations. She wrote a book called Harvesting Color, which is a regional look at the natural dye traditions in North America. And she has built an extensive network of farmers and artisans within Northern California's fiber shed, which is her word, to pilot the regenerative fiber systems model on the community scale. So what all of that means is that she's figuring out a way for fiber to be more sustainable if you look at all of the different parts. What I think is really interesting about that is that she's going to not only speak but also be on a panel with a couple of people from our industry, Noel Asmar and Debbie Leon and Sarah Irvani, who all are in the business of fiber, right? Well, Sarah is in the business of plastic in the sense that she makes flip-flops, but she has an entirely closed loop manufacturing system, and there's no waste. And Noel, as many people know, has really launched this very interesting recycling effort with regard to the hospitality industry's consumption of towels, uniforms, and linens, which really, as Noel has found, and I'm sure we'll share with everyone, was very difficult to do because people didn't want to recycle them. So I think what you'll see and experience from this panel and learning from Rebecca is what is fiber and its context for clothing, and from animals with the soil, this very sort of granular, here's where it comes from, to the far, far end of the user spectrum of this is the hotel uniform that someone wears and what do you do with it at the end of its life cycle. So her book just came out. I don't have it yet. It promises to be fascinating. And I think that she will be a very interesting and valuable speaker at Congress. Let's see. Who else? Oh, yes, by background. We have a woman named Amanda Joy Ravenhill coming. Sorry, I just knocked my computer. She's the executive director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. So for folks going to Congress, it's a good idea to brush up a little bit on Buckminster Fuller. Recently, there has been a book that came out that talks about all of the innovations that he made in terms of engineering and design, which I should have brought that up here to show, which I thought was really fantastic and gave me great insight into Buckminster Fuller, who, by the way, is from Massachusetts, which I didn't know. I didn't know, and has really had such a large influence on the field of sustainability. So that would be something to recommend. And let's see, am I forgetting anybody?
I don't know about books. Is there anything about Basil Kincaid?
Oh, Basil has a book. He has a book too. So Basil Kincaid, who is a fiber artist who's coming from St. Louis, who is going to be helping us with the quilt for climate change. He really talks about his use of all things recycled in creating all of his art. So he is a quilter and a sewer by profession, but has really focused on creating works of art out of found materials. So found textile materials, and we are doing a collection of found materials to create a quilt while we are at Congress that will kind of go on tour to a variety of properties and show our collective efforts to fight climate change. And so for the folks on the call, if you haven't sent in a piece of fabric from one of your well-loved pieces of clothing that has a great story about you and the environment, you are invited to bring it to Congress, where it will be quilted in to our climate change quilt. So that's exciting. And or you could also bring like a little embellishment. So whether it be like a little jewel or a button that has meaning. So, you know, don't feel like you have to be committed to bringing a large piece of clothing. It can also be something small. So that's a little bit about Basil.
Theme Reigns. I'm not sure she has a book, but worth mentioning.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that nothing changes with her plans because of the fires in Australia. But she is an incredible healer. She's going to talk about healing at the conference. She has a fully organic and sustainable skincare brand that she started some years ago. Sally knows her, actually. and she is based in Australia and is very interested in partnering with GSN to bring some of our programs and events to Australia, because they have also an interest in being greener and more sustainable in the spa business there. So I'm wondering if anyone has any questions about any of these books or about any of the presenters. I think that's it. Or I could easily talk a little more about any of the specific books. Anybody?
Going once. Feel free to type it in the side chat.
I'm wondering if this was helpful. We do have just a small turnout, but that's fine. Jonathan, are you coming to Congress? You can chat me. I'm hoping that you are. Oh, we have a question.
It was great, said Sally.
Thank you, Sally. I think I'm calling this the Cliff Note version. The Cliff Note version of the Congress reading list. This gives you a sense of some of these topics. All right. Okay, good.
And Costas Chris will be a presenter too, one of the first presenters on.
Oh yes, yep. And he really is he's a founder of the eco wellness movement and has worked for National Geographic for a number of years, and I think has a very interesting perspective on where we are in the world right now with, sustainable travel. And, certainly there's a very large interest in regenerative farming. And so, John and Steve Sicalo, who has a company called Mana, who is based in Hawaii. He's based in Kauai, actually, but by training, he is a regenerative farmer. He went to school at UC Davis, and has studied this and this type of farming for, 25 years. So he and John Rulak, I met them at the American Spas CBD Summit in August, and quickly recognized that these were the two smartest people in the entire room with regard to not only CBD and cannabis, because you cannot be a CBD expert unless you are also a cannabis expert, but also about regenerative farming and the impact that it will have on the earth and certainly our industry. So that's
John said it'll be in France. When is the next Congress?
The next Congress will not, it's every other year, so it will be not 2021, 2022. It will be in January of 2022. And we're looking at a couple of actually international destinations. So we're excited about that. And sorry to miss you, Jonathan, because I know you've come to several of them. Yes, we will absolutely do a review. I think that's a great it's a great idea. And we'll also have videos that we will produce and put out on YouTube. There is no way to speak. We can't turn on that they can speak to us.
Not the participants, just the panelists, unfortunately.
Yep. Sorry, Sally. I know there is a way to do it, but I think we have to set it up on the upfront.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
Well, if we have no other questions or things that people want to talk about with regard to Congress, then we can go forth and do some reading. And thanks for joining us today.
All right.
On behalf of GSN.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.